Hello and welcome to this special video. As requested by people on Twitter and in the comment section, I'm going to be taking you through all of the armies that I have here. So to be clear, I do have more models that I'm not going to be showing you. Partly that's because some of them are unpainted, and partly that's because some of them are not here. They're in the attic of my parents' house. Most of that stuff is really badly painted because I did it when I was a kid. So what you're going to be seeing today are the armies that I have mostly collected since getting back into the hobby. Though one of them is kind of like my legacy army, the one that I initially collected when I was a teenager. In fact, that's as good a place as any to start. Let's go through this in chronological order. My first ever edition of White Dwarf was number 289, and in that there was a battle report between Iron Warriors and Space Wolves. And possibly just because it was the first time I'd seen a painted Space Marine army, it was just seared into my brain. And I wanted to collect Space Marines because basically everybody, when they first come to the hobby, wants to collect Space Marines, especially when they're a teenager. And I wanted to do them in Space Wolves Grey. But I didn't really like the wolf iconography. I didn't like all the extra stuff that was on top of the armor. So I came up with an excuse for vanilla Marines, which I could run as Ultramarines, in Space Wolves Grey, which was that this was a chapter that splintered from the Space Wolves that was codex compliant, called the Redemptionists. And the reason that they have the red scar across one of their eyes, which is on their helmet and on the pauldrons, is to represent the sin previously of being part of the Space Wolves and not listening to the Magic Spacebook. I started collecting them in the very late days of 3rd edition, going mostly through 4th edition and then a little bit of time in 5th edition. And my first ever model was this guy. And you can tell he was my first model because the pose is very unimaginative and the paint is very thick. But he then formed part of my first squad of Tactical Marines, the 2nd squad of the 3rd company. And looking through these guys now, it's kind of embarrassing just how thick the paint is and how amateurish some of the stuff is. But, you know, I think it looks alright, especially when you look at them in a large unit. I then went on to be a bit more ambitious with some other units in the army, so getting some bikers and making them do wheelies. You might notice that the sergeant has double lightning claws. Something that you could do in the 4th edition codex, I think, or it might have been the 3rd edition codex. I just really like the idea of a guy being on a bike and having Wolverine-like claws, but then I didn't think about how he controlled the bike, so I had to put these like little Doc Ock style mechadendrites that would plug into the bike. You couldn't do it in later editions because obviously it makes no goddamn sense. I then went on to build a 2nd tactical squad with a Razorback, and you can really tell the improvement actually as my painting progressed from doing these models and also Lord of the Rings miniatures at the time. These guys are a lot more neatly painted and the paint is a lot thinner, and just generally I think they look a lot better as a unit. That continues into a group of scouts. Now, these guys are half metal and half the plastic kit that came out, I think, just as I got into the hobby. Now, one of the metal ones I actually did up to Golden Demon standard, or what I thought was Golden Demon standard for the Youngbloods category in Games Day, I think 2004. And I think he looks pretty great. Looking at him now, there's a ton that I would improve, and the skin is basically just one colour, but certain aspects of the paint job I'm still really proud of. The following year, I entered a Tech Marine, which I don't actually have with me. I'm not actually sure where he's gone. I do have some archive pictures, which I'll put in here, which is probably the paint job whilst I was doing the hobby at this time that I was proudest of. I think it took me about 40 or 50 hours, which, now I say that, doesn't sound like very much, because I guess my standard for what I think is a good paint job has just improved quite a bit. But I will always be proud of his little iPod on the Signum. Rounding off the original army, we also have a Vindicator, which is the original Vindicator kit, so the old Rhino chassis with the metal plate on the front with the Demolisher cannon. I really like the fact that it's as old as it is. It just looks cute. We also have a squad of Assault Marines with Chaplain with Jetpack. This Jetpack, actually, for the Chaplain, came from the Shrike kit, the Kavan Shrike kit, and it was one of the first times that I think I ever ordered something online from the Games Workshop store, which was like £1.50, I think, to buy a backpack. Those were the days. There's also a bunch of characters which I've built up over the years from blister packs and also from Games Days. So the guy with the Power Fist held up high is a Games Day miniature, I think from maybe 2005, and the others are veterans, I think from a veterans kit. I'm not actually sure where the other ones went, but the one on the far left, which looks the worst, was my first character and was the model I bought because I knew I needed a HQ unit. Then pretty much the last thing that I painted for the army was this unit of Terminators, which I think, looking at now, are really quite crisp. They look really good. And Terminators are just a classic unit. They look amazing. They're so iconically 40k. And you can definitely see the improvement from these guys compared to my first model. But then I took a big old gap from the hobby. University, girlfriend got in the way, and it would be about 10 years before I would climb back into the fold. Funnily enough, when I did so, it actually made perfect sense from a lore perspective, because I always said that this chapter had sort of extensive Mechanicus support in order to get back on its feet, and they were kind of in the pocket of the Mechanicus. So when Primaris Marines rolled around, well, it just made sense to put them in the army. And the difference here is night and day compared to the earlier Marines. I've only done these 5 Assault Intercessors and the Blade Guard Ancient so far, which I have covered in the painting recap videos. I think they look great. I love these kits. You can tell that I hadn't quite got back into the knack of doing basing when I painted these. I kind of need to go over those again because they look really quite embarrassingly bad. But one problem that I always had with playing as the Space Marines was that I was too into the lore. I was always aware that for every soldier that falls, it was a hero of the Imperium, and it was a lot of pressure to keep even the most basic tactical squad alive. And I never really liked that. So when I decided to get back into the hobby, I thought I'd pick a new army that had the exact opposite of that situation, Tyranids. Because it doesn't matter if you kill them, there's a million more on the way, and I literally don't care about any of them. These guys come from Hive Fleet Nostromo. Obviously, this is xenomorph inspired. Tyranids always look quite xenomorphy, but I've never seen them painted like actual xenomorphs from Aliens, so that's what I decided to do. Anything that doesn't have synapse, such as these Hormagaunts, has no eyes. So in the case of the Hormagaunts, I green stuffed over the eyes, and I think it makes them look that bit more menacing. Unfortunately, you can't really tell because they weren't that prominent in the first place, and they're tiny on tiny models, but I know they're there. A little bit more striking is the very black colour scheme. Some people think they're actually unpainted, which is painful. And also the acid goop, which I have done on some of them, and I actually need to go back and do on the rest. Some of this is Yoo-hoo glue, which I just string between bits, but most of it is actually glue gun glue. So taking a toothpick and then heating up glue with the glue gun and effectively taking a molten blob of the glue and stringing it between wherever I want it to be, whether that's on the teeth or on the claws or whatever. The warriors are much the same as the Hormagaunts, but with eyes, and they also have a more interesting colour scheme. The Hormagaunts are basically just black, whereas I, for the warriors, decided to add a kind of face hugger beige fleshy type colour, which was inspired by Alex from the Battle Boys. Is he part of the Orks cast? I guess he is. And then accompanying these, we have 2 Tyranid Primes, the cheapest HQ option available. And this basically formed a 1,000 point list in 8th edition. The idea behind the army was me and a couple of friends were going to go to Warhammer World with a new army each of 1,000 points, and we'd do a little kind of round robin tournament. And these guys are not competitive. They are fantastic in kill team, but generally speaking, this army does not do very well. In fact, the best unit in the army are the Hive Guard, which look very xenomorphy anyway. I loved painting these guys. I'm actually going to be getting more because I really like painting them, but also it just turns out they're incredibly viable. Then rounding out the army, we also have 3 Venomthropes, which is probably the best painted unit in the army and offer this kind of aura that keeps the other stuff alive, which is very needed. And also the Toxicrene, aka the single most awkward to transport kit Games Workshop has ever produced. I had to magnetize the arms, there was just no other way. As a quick little interlude here, I also have the box of Aeronautica Imperialis planes. I've only played like 2 games of this in my entire life, which were kind of fun, but mostly I bought it because tiny plane models. And I really enjoyed painting these guys up in the Luftwaffe colours for the Imperial forces, because let's face it, the Imperium is basically Nazis in space. And then to try and capture the anarchic nature of orcs, I decided to paint the orc planes as Jackson Polorks, which is I'm a sucker for a pun. And of course, was really the prelude for the main project that I've been working on recently, my Hawaiian orks. This has been my on-stream project. I bought this army, I have been assembling and painting it on stream, and it's just, I'm really happy with how it looks. It's still only about half finished, maybe, but I am already really proud of how they've come out. The majority of the army itself is 2 huge blobs of 30 boys, and in order to not go insane painting these, I have decided to, for the first time basically ever, to cut some corners with painting, and I've painted them mostly with contrast. The flesh is orc flesh mixed with a tiny bit of dark oath, just to kind of take the bubblegumminess out, and then most of the other details are snakebite, Cygor brown, or black Templar, then dry brushed with metallics, just a really kind of clean, simple metallics. You may notice, by the way, that some of the models have names on the bases. You might have seen it on the Space Marines as well. That's a hangover from a video I did on the main channel channel where I taught an AI to play Warhammer, and I needed to keep track of which model was which. Once I've done the sequel to that, I'll probably paint over the bases again. Obviously, these models have a lot that make them very unique. They make them very distinctly Hawaiian. One of those things is the basing, and that's something that I get comments on probably more than any other part of it, actually. The sand is something called Pebeo texture gel, the yellow texture gel, which is just like kind of a goop that you squirt out onto the base, leave to dry overnight, and then dry brush with Skull White, and it gives you this lovely sand texture. The water is a bit more interesting. Previously, I've experimented with PVA glue and Ardcoat. In this case, it's actually a substance called Liquitex, which is something you normally use to thicken paints, that you add a tiny bit of blue. I normally use Cantor blue to give it a tiny bit of a sheen, and then put it on the base of the miniature and effectively try and give it some texture, some wave-like texture with a paintbrush, then dry brush that with Skull White as well. And on some of the bases, you'll notice some foam, and the sea foam is actually a bunch of tiny nail art glass beads, which I got from eBay and effectively just glue down with a bunch of PVA. They come off quite easily, so I should probably think of a better way of adhering them. But I love the effect that they produce, especially on this one guy with his foot in the water. It looks like foam. Of course, the other most noticeable part of the Hawaiian theme would be the shirts. I have basically one shirt design that I use over and over and over again with the, I think they're hibiscus, the kind of classically Hawaiian flower, and put them on any number of bright, bold colors that you might want. Red, pink, orange, blue, whatever. The first one of these took a while, but once you get into the swing of things, I can actually paint up a boy with this shirt texture quite quickly. It helps actually that the boys have an awful lot of their shirts covered with other stuff. The shirts are most noticeable on the two knobs. One of them has this print, which is the one that has the most effort that's gone into it, and the other one has a tiny version of the shirt that I wear when painting these models. The shirts are actually quite easy to make. You basically just take green stuff and then squish it between two pieces of plastic, and I actually normally use the pieces of plastic that the green stuff comes with that have been covered with Vaseline. You squidge it such that it forms a flat layer, and then basically just put that onto the model and make cuts onto that as if you were a tailor, and then stitch together the fabric. And it normally comes together in about 2 or 3 pieces. It's actually easier than it looks. Other details on the models, such as the floral lays and the sunglasses, are normally sculpted with Milliput. I just prefer the lack of elasticity that Milliput has compared to green stuff, but both substances are used all over this army. Some other little details include the throwing coconuts and pineapples. So these were 3D printed for me by the lovely Cass from my Discord community, and she's been an absolute lifesaver with these because it turns out by mixing Age of Sigmar and 40k components, I don't have enough sluggers, I don't have enough pistols. So in order for everybody to have a ranged weapon and a melee weapon, I decided that, you know what, they're just going to throw coconuts and pineapples. Sure. Of course, I say everyone has a ranged weapon and a melee weapon. These guys just have a coconut tree that they've picked up because they're orcs. I mean, come on. The centerpiece of the army so far is undoubtedly the Weird Boy. This is an Ogre Kingdom's Firebelly that I basically did a little bit of conversion to, replaced his shield boss with an Orc shield from Age of Sigmar, replaced the top of his mallet with a standard from the Orc kit, and then green stuffed on his grass skirt and used Milliput for details like the floral lays. I really took my time with this model and I'm very happy with the result. Not perfectly happy, the on-source lighting doesn't exactly work, perhaps because the whole of the rest of the model is just a bit too light. But I think if I had done it a bit more realistically, it wouldn't have fitted in with the whole happy, saturated Hawaiian theme. I can't wait to use this guy in an actual game, using to jump on one of the units of 30 boys. It's going to be really fun. And then rounding out the army, we have some grots, which I haven't shown you because they're grots, who cares, and these looters, with the idea being that they have picked up some cannons from a shipwreck on the Hawaiian Islands and they're using them. I love the idea of RNG weapons, so I've got 5 looters in the army list and also 2 bubble chuckers, which are going to be scenic bases and just anarchic with grots on some lounges and coconut trees on the bases and things like that. Can't wait. And then just to briefly tease what's coming next, I have these surfers. So I'm going to run these as bikers, and my war boss is going to be on a war trike, which I'm going to do as one of the boats from Moana, so kind of classic Polynesian style boat. The surfers themselves are a mixture of 40k and Age of Sigmar parts, and the surfboards are 3D printed again by the wonderful Cass. Also hoping that with these guys I'm going to get a chance to experiment with using UV activated resin to kind of freeze waves in time and have some really cool water effects, which I think combined with the foam provided by the nail art beads, I think these guys could look really cool. I'm super excited to start on them. Thank you very much for watching the video. I really hope that you enjoyed it. Let me know in the comments if you have any suggestions for other types of videos that I could do on this channel besides the monthly painting recaps, which I am going to keep doing because they hold me accountable. I really hope that you took something from this video, whether that be inspiration for your own armies or perhaps what not to do. Let's face it, that's probably more realistic. And of course, if you'd like to see more geeky wargaming painting content from me, then feel free to subscribe to this channel, though bear in mind it is the second channel. It's not going to be good going forwards. The video quality has probably peaked with this one.